All right, let's get right into it. We're tackling a question that is, frankly, a huge deal for thousands of military families out there. How can a military spouse legally stop paying state income tax? The rules on this have changed so much it's almost dizzying. What used to be this confusing mess of laws is actually morphed into a really powerful set of federal protections. So in this deep dive, we're going to break down exactly how it all works, step by step.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at the legal history, how we even got these rules. Then we're going to bust a big myth that's floating around. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of a state tax audit, what it looks like, and how to handle it. We'll cover the critical paperwork you absolutely have to get right. And we'll finish up with some really powerful strategic moves you can make right now.
So to really appreciate the kind of flexibility and, honestly, power that military families have today, you've got to go back in time a bit. We have to start with the old rules, the ones that were on the books for decades. And let me tell you, it was a totally different ballgame, and usually a much, much more expensive one.
Okay, this timeline really tells the whole story. You can see this huge shift in federal law. It all kicked off back in 2003 with the SCRA, but that only protected the service member's income. The spouse was kind of left out. Then in 2009, MSRRA came along and extended some protection. But the real revolution, that happened with the VBTA and VAEIA. And this is the key takeaway. These laws completely changed the game. We went from simply protecting your old home state to allowing spouses to proactively elect a new one just for tax purposes. And believe me, that difference is, well, it's everything.
So what did it look like before 2009? Well, this was the reality for so many families. The service member's income, totally protected. Let's say they're from tax-free Texas but get stationed in high-tax California. California couldn't touch a dime of their military pay. Great for them. But the spouse? That was a completely different story. Their income was fully 100% taxed by California. This created what's called a split domicile, where for tax purposes, the husband and wife were legally residents of two different states, and you can bet that often came with a seriously painful tax bill.
So in 2009, Congress finally stepped in to fix this mess with the Military Spouses Residency Relief Act. You'll hear it called MSRRA. And it was a huge step forward, no doubt. It extended that federal protection to spouses for the first time. But, and this is a big but, it wasn't a free-for-all. It came with this really strict three-pronged test you had to meet. And as you're about to see, parts 2 and 3 of that test, the Solely test and the same domicile rule. Oh man, those became huge sticking points.
And right here, this is the classic example of the fundamental flaw in that original law. We call it the meet and marry problem. Imagine this. A service member from tax-free Texas is stationed in Virginia. While they're there, they meet and marry someone from North Carolina. Well, under the old rules, the new spouse was completely out of luck. They couldn't claim Texas as their domicile because, hey, they'd never actually lived there. So that big MSRRA protection, totally useless for them. A massive loophole. Then came 2018 and the Veterans Benefits and Transition Act, or VBTA, and it fixed this with just a really powerful and elegant solution. It just wiped away that physical presence requirement. Instead, it created a statutory election. The key word here is elect. Now, a spouse could simply choose to adopt the service member's domicile for tax purposes, no questions asked. So that spouse from North Carolina we just talked about, they could immediately, on day one, elect Texas residency and get that zero income tax benefit. The meet and marry problem? Poof! Gone.
And that brings us right up to the present day. The VAEIA, that's the Veterans Auto and Education Improvement Act, is a true paradigm shift. It amended federal law, specifically 50 U.S.C. Section 4001A3, and it blew the options wide open. The spouse's choice went from just one option to 3. Now, every single tax year, a military couple can choose the best option for them: the service member's domicile, the spouse's own domicile, or their permanent duty station. This isn't some minor tweak, folks. This is a massive expansion of strategic financial power for military families.
All right, so with these incredibly powerful federal laws on the books, you'd think everything would be crystal clear, right? But there's this one really common, really confusing question that pops up constantly on online military finance groups and forums.
Yeah, this specific number, 30 states. Why? If this is a federal law that applies everywhere, where on earth does the number 30 come from? Well, the crazy thing is the number isn't technically wrong. It's just being talked about in a completely wrong context. It's for a totally different benefit.
So where does it come from? It's basically a mashup of a bunch of other totally unrelated benefits.
Most often, that 30-something states number is referring to how many states don't tax military retirement pay, or sometimes it gets confused with Social Security exemptions or even professional licensing compacts. The bottom line is, it has pretty much nothing to do with the income a spouse is earning while their partner is still on active duty.
So let's get this straight. The reality is this: the potential for a state tax exemption isn't limited to 30 states, not even close. By strategically choosing a domicile in one of the 9 states with zero income tax, we're talking Florida, Texas, Washington, you know the list, a military spouse's income can be shielded from taxes in all 41 of the other states that do have an income tax. The protection isn't regional, it's effectively nationwide.
But you know the saying, with great power comes great scrutiny. And it's absolutely true here. As these federal protections got stronger, high-tax states, think California, Virginia, New York, they started losing out on a lot of revenue. And the response? Well, they started turning up the heat with more audits, which has led to what everyone now calls the MSRRA Audit.
And here's how it usually starts. It's not some investigator in a dark room. No, it's almost always a computer. Here's the sequence. Your civilian employer, in, say, California, files your W-2 with the state. The state's automated system scans it and sees you earned, let's say, $60,000, but it also sees that zero state tax was withheld. Then, when you don't file a state return because, hey, you believe you're exempt, the system flags it. It sees unreported income, and bam, it automatically spits out a notice of proposed assessment, a tax bill, and mails it right to your door.
Okay, so once that automated letter gets you to respond, a real human auditor gets involved, and they usually have a 2-part playbook. First, they'll attack you on that old solely test from the original MSRRA. They'll argue, well, you bought a house here, or you've got a great career here. You're not here solely to be with your spouse anymore. Second, they'll dig for any evidence that you've abandoned your home state, and the number one thing they look for, their holy grail of evidence, is if you've registered to vote locally, right there at your duty station.
But this is where your defense becomes so powerful, because it's not based on feelings or your subjective intent. It's based on cold, hard federal statute. Your argument is simple. First, your presence was caused by the PCS orders. That satisfies the old solely test. But more importantly, under the newer laws, VBTA and VAEIA, your domicile is a federal election under 50 U.S.C. 4001 A3. You don't have to prove you have a bunch of physical ties to Texas or Florida. You just have to prove you made the legal election under federal law. Your proof? The service member's DD 2058 and your consistent records.
Now let's talk about one of the most common and, honestly, most costly mistakes we see families make. And it all comes down to a simple paperwork error. There's this huge confusion between the form used for the service member's military pay and the completely different form needed for the spouse's civilian job. Okay, lean in for this one because this is absolutely positively critical. A DD Form 20581, that is a Department of Defense form. It is for military payroll only. The service member uses it to tell the military not to withhold state taxes from their military paycheck. If a spouse takes that form and hands it to their HR department at their civilian job, it's basically a useless piece of paper to them. It will be ignored. What the spouse needs to do is file the specific official withholding form for the state they're working in.
Yeah, to do this right, you absolutely must use the state's own form. Here are just a few key examples. In California, you're looking for the DE4. In Virginia, it's the VA4. And they even have specific codes on there just for military spouses. And then you have states like Maryland that make you jump through extra hoops. You actually have to mail a special form, the MW57M, directly to the state controller every single year to maintain your exemption.
Okay, now we get to the really fun part, the strategic part. With that 3-option election rule for VEIA, families can stop just playing defense against audits and actually start playing tax offense. You can proactively manage your tax situation in ways that were just completely impossible a few years back. Let's look at a classic commuter strategy we see all the time around Washington, D.C. Picture this. The family lives in Virginia because they're stationed there. The spouse holds a Texas domicile, zero income tax. But they get a job and commute into D.C. every day. So who gets to tax them? Well, Virginia can't because of MSRRA. And thanks to reciprocity agreements in the area, D.C. can't tax them either. The result? Zero. State and district income tax on that entire salary is zero.
And this option to elect the permanent duty station, the PDS, as your tax residence? Man, what a game changer. Take a look at Fort Campbell. The base literally sits on the Kentucky-Tennessee border. So a family could be living in a house on the Kentucky side of the line, which has a state income tax, but the PDS itself is officially in Tennessee, which has zero tax on wages. So what can they do? They can elect Tennessee as their tax residence. They are effectively importing Tennessee's tax law right across the border into their Kentucky house. It's incredible.
The VAEIA also created what I like to call a temporary escape hatch. Let's say a family is from, Vermont. They love Vermont, it's their forever home, but it has a pretty high income tax. Then they get orders to Florida, a no-tax state. Before these new rules, they'd have been stuck paying Vermont taxes on all their income, no matter where they lived. But now, for the few years they're stationed in Florida, they can just elect the Florida PDS as their tax residence. It's like flipping a switch that temporarily turns off their Vermont tax bill, and the best part is, they don't have to give up their Vermont domicile to do it.
So, when you look at the whole picture, this incredible evolution in federal law has created a really powerful, truly nationwide tax haven for military families. But let's be real, it has come at a direct cost to state treasuries. And that leaves us with one big final question to think about. As Congress keeps solidifying this federal protection, what new, what creative, what, let's face it, aggressive legal challenges are states going to invent next to try and claw some of that revenue back? This tug of war between federal law and state budgets, it is far from over.